According to Bohm, we live in a phenomenal plane that he calls the explicate order. Things happen in linear succession, in time, in space, and there is a limited capacity of consciousness to understand cause and effect and relationships of various kinds, including the source of one's own thoughts, because many of the events that occur in time and space do not occur as effects of causes prior in time, but they occur as unfolding aspects of an implicate order. Okay? He wrote a very important book called Wholeness and the Implicate Order. It's something I recommend. We're probably going to read it soon in our book group. But the basic idea is that the implicate order is that level of being and consciousness from which the consciousness of each of us derives, because we are actually located in the implicate order and projected into the explicate order. We're not really here in time and space. That's the illusion, that's Maya. We are actually in the implicate order, which is beyond time and space, in which all of time and space is now. There's one eternal now, but that now unfolds in a way that from the dimension of space-time, it looks like things are happening in a succession that cannot be predicted, okay? But if you can attune to the information present in the implicate order, you are then able to work the explicate order with a lot more information than most people will have available to them. And you'll be able to alter what might have been your destiny if you didn't have that information. But more important than that even is the fact that when you recognize that your being is in the implicate order, not the explicate order, and you know that you are therefore not the bodily being you take yourself to be, but an intelligence that is being projected into that form that comes from and is part of the whole, an infinite whole that contains the whole universe within its embrace, you could say. It encompasses and pervades and determines, ordains the events that will unfold in the explicate order. Then there is a capacity to make use of that information for the benevolent purpose of bringing out the most ideal solutions to problems that seem to exist in the explicate order through downloading information that will help to resolve problems that cannot be resolved at the level of information available within the explicate order alone, right? So the more we can download, the more inspiration we can receive, the more information from that higher source we can transmit, attune to, and make use of, then that wisdom is able to be put to the use of healing and of positive transformation in the direction in which the implicate order's goal for this cosmos intends, and to do it with the most effectiveness and with the least resistance and the most wisdom and love and a sense of wholeness, of being one with the whole, not simply an entity who is struggling, competing with, and at the mercy of other entities within the space-time matrix. Okay? So that paradigm shift that quantum physics affirms, at least many physicists will accept that reality, that Bohm has theorized, is, I think, a step toward understanding an even more radical paradigm of non-duality that has been taught by the yogic tradition, or traditions, because it pervades both the Vedic and the Buddhist and the Taoist Eastern traditions, but that in which the implicate order and the explicate order are not actually separated at all, and in which that information is much more easily accessible than Bohm or the physicists would assume. Okay, so that translation, that's one of the first steps. And if you can get past the idea that you are a bodily being going through space-time, and if you can grasp that you are actually the supreme intelligence that is choreographing all of this, and live from that level of consciousness, you will have no more suffering. And not only that, but there will be astonishment and delight and bliss and joy at every moment. And the closer you are to that attunement, the more joy, the more beauty you will discover in life. And the less fear and the less desire and the less limitations, because you will know that you are a being who does not die and whose life is not dependent on the life of a bodily organism. And once the fear of death is gone and the belief that you are just that limited being who has to have certain things and who has to fulfill the desires of others in order to get affirmed and validated, and all of those aspects of egoic life that make us dependent, fragile, unhappy beings, then the more we live with nobility and empowerment and sovereignty over our existence, rather than being enslaved to drives and impulses and demands of others and feelings of negative affect that can plague our day and make us feel unworthy and feel whatever negative images were sedimented into our subconscious minds, whether in infancy in this life or in the prenatal period, because consciousness is already present within the womb of the mother, or in past lifetimes. They start to filter up, and they can contaminate your present. They become filters through which suddenly you're seeing the world, and they distort your perception, and in particular your perception about yourself, and create all kinds of massive negative feelings and the consequences of them, which is very often some bad karma in one's life. Okay, so this is why there's a very important practical use of all of this, and why meditation, which shifts your vibrational frequency so that you are able to resonate at the frequency level of the implicate order, of the real transcendent self, is so important. It's the only way to get there. You don't get there through a rocket ship. You don't get there through some Stargate portal. You don't get there through some magical incantation or any of those types of means. And this is the most direct way. And it doesn't require swallowing any particular chemicals or any other kind of temporary shift of consciousness, but a direct manual control of your capacity to attune your consciousness to a higher frequency. That's what you want to learn. What I want to impress upon you is you have that ability. Even if you say, but I don't know how, I've never done it. You have that ability, and you have done it in the past. You may have forgotten, but you have that ability. And it turns out that it's actually very easy to do it. There are resistances to doing it, but it's very easy. That's what we're going to be practicing this weekend. So that's the translation. The transformation is doing that reattunement to a higher frequency and learning to be comfortable in a level and a state of consciousness in which you realize you're not the ego, and you're not the body, and that you are now in an energy field that has a lot more energies available to be harnessed and to flow with and in and through, and a lot more information. The ego, that level of consciousness, that operating system that got installed in childhood, doesn't like more information. Its main job is to try to keep you from getting too much information, because it has learned that too much information destabilizes you. But the yogi wants as much information as possible, because knowledge is power. But that power is going to dissolve the ego. It's an acid. Knowledge is an acid that kills the ego, because the ego is a false self of a limited nature that was installed to control you and socialize you, adapt you to the family system, which was another larger operating system, and then the social system and whatever religious system you were placed into, and enable you to function, at least function according to into what the other wanted of you. But now, if you want freedom from that system, which now controls you and you are enslaved to, if it's still operating, then you need to get enough information to realize and to gain the power to delete that program, okay? If you want to do that. That'll be kind of the question. Do I want to do that, or do I want to stay in the comfort zone of the ego? Because you may not want to give all of that up, because it will mean reorienting yourself toward a totally different reality than the one you believed was real, that now you'll see as a very small box and you've outgrown it, but you know, now you're in a realm without limits. And that can be scary to people, which is why sometimes it's useful to have a community that's all doing the same thing, to feel like this is not total madness, and that there is a way to do this safely and with a systematic and rigorous approach that doesn't create more sense of lostness along the way. And then we will reach that final level of the trivium, which is transcendence of the ego, in which we can abide as the real self and remove and release all traces that remain of the ego, so it doesn't disturb us and create intermittent falls back into obsolete ways of thinking and acting that produce suffering. And that is the purification of the soul, to use the religious terminology, that is a more gradual effort. You can have sudden enlightenment, which is the paradigm shift and the grokking of the truth that you're not the ego, and the realization of the inner light. That can all come just like that. But then there is a gradual process of releasing the resistances, the functions of the ego that were there to keep you limited and to keep you misinformed about the information that you weren't supposed to have, and the fears and the traumas, the results of traumas that occurred to you in childhood that may still affect your self-image and your sense of worthiness to even achieve this transcendence, right? So these are false ideas because you never were the ego. That's the illusion, that's the ignorance we have to come out of. It's not like you are an ego who's now trying to go to a higher pay grade. No, it's not that. You never were the ego, but you believed that you were, because your consciousness was projected into an immature, helpless, infantile human body, and that bodily organism required the love and attention of others in order to survive, and it acquiesced in accepting the belief systems that it received from outside and took them in as if they were true, including their insanity and conflicted nature, because you would have probably received from different people in the family system, different attitudes. And as you grow, you would have a more elaborated ego with various different subpersonalities and capacities, that some were useful at work, some are useful with the family, some are useful in sexual relationships, some are useful in a situation of strangeness in an exotic place. And you will have these different repertoires of information and of self-image that you have developed to use to deal with, to cope with situations of difficulty and adversity. None of them are going to help you in this process, which is about dropping all the masks, all the programs and the attitudes, and discovering who you are in the naked awareness beyond and behind all of that. So that's where a kind of courageous attitude of the spiritual warrior is required if you're going to allow yourself to get the vision, the full experience or imperience of who you are at that level that transcends the ego. I hope you'll all go for it and realize there's nothing that can stop you but your own fear. Okay. I've talked enough. I want to go from theory to practice, but before I do, I want to open the floor. Does anybody have any questions on any of this, or comments, or reactions, or whatever you wish to share?
How do you spell Bohm?
Hmm?
How do you spell Bohm?
Bohm, B-O-H-M. You want to put that on the board? David Bohm. This is also connected to the holographic paradigm. Why don't you write holographic? We are going to, at some point during the weekend, also deal with that concept from physics, because it's a very important one that answers many questions that neuroscience has not been able to answer. Neuroscience has failed to solve what David Chalmers, another philosopher who's tuned into this, what he calls the hard problem of consciousness. How does the brain generate consciousness? Well, the brain doesn't generate consciousness. The problem is solved because it's not asked at the right level. Our consciousness doesn't come from the brain. It may get transduced by the brain, but there's an entirely different way in which perception happens that cannot happen in accord with the ideas that neuroscience presents to us, as if we are receiving sensory information through the various five senses, turns into nerve impulses, which move very slowly and are somehow processed in the brain and turned into an image and turned into information, and then we react. We would be completely out of sync with reality. Things happen much too fast. It can't be explained with the idea that the brain is making decisions in real time about what is being perceived. Moreover, what the neuroscientific paradigm cannot explain is that the velocity of time is a variable. It's not a constant. This is a very important point. Clock time is measurable, and you can divide that into seconds and minutes and hours, etc., on the basis of motion, the motion of the sun or the earth around the sun and its rotation, and etc., etc. But you're measuring motion. You're not actually measuring time. And so the understanding of what is time is another thing that physics hasn't been able to explain, or philosophy for that matter. The closest any philosopher has gotten is that of Henri Bergson. You might write Bergson. We're going to study a little bit of his work. He developed the holographic theory in the 1890s, 50 years before the hologram was invented. So it was avant la lettre, as the French say. There was no term for holography, but he recognized that only a holographic concept could explain how we exist, and how we hear music, for example, as a melody. If every moment is a different sound, how do we put that together into a melody that makes sense? Or how do you remember what I said 5 minutes ago and connect it to what I'm saying now and actually make sense of it? I hope you're doing that. But in any case, that requires a capacity for a consciousness that extends through time, that is not momentary, and that is able to exist in a state of duration that transcends whatever information is being received at any given moment. And time cannot be chronological and linear. You cannot explain it that way, because that would mean that the present is instantaneous. It would have no thickness to it. And therefore, there would be nothing, no information to be able to get unless you could have a larger chunk available as a single whole that would transcend the linear seeming movement of time. So there has to be this unmoving consciousness that is able to grok large chunks of time. Ultimately, the implicate order can grasp all of time and all of space as a single whole, a single now. But the higher in our frequency we get, the more we are able to do that. So martial artists have always used this variability of the speed of time in order to be able to defeat their opponent. Because if I can slow down your movements, if you're going to be trying to punch or kick, and I can make it appear to me in slow motion, whereas I can react and reply to those in real time and in fast motion, then I will be able to defeat the opponent. Because even no matter how fast it looks like they're going, I can shift that in order to be able to move in between their parries or their kicks or their punches or whatever, and be able to make an appropriate move that uses their energy against themselves. And I can do that, though, only to the extent that I can increase the speed of my own processing of time and include more of the past and the future as a single whole, so I know where their movement is going and what the intentions are, and I can then make it appear in a way that I will be able to use. I think everyone has the experience that sometimes time seems to move very fast for you and sometimes very, very slow. And you say, wow, it's only been 5 minutes? I thought we'd been talking for an hour or something, right? You have that experience, or the reverse. But if you can actually harness that and become able to shift your capacity to alter the velocity of time or its acceleration, you will be able to accomplish a lot more than you can if you are simply subject to whatever vibrational frequency causes the movement of time to appear for you subjectively. So subjectivity is a malleable artifact of consciousness. It's not the entirety of consciousness. And it's very important that we understand that we can make use of its components and shift the way that the phenomenal explicate order unfolds itself, so that we are able to ride the crest of the wave, let's say, and not fall and be taken by surprise by events that we are not able to cope with. Okay.